who was at Columbia with me, he said, Len, we can go to Mexico. The brothers are raising their fists. They're raising hell in Mexico. I said, how the hell we can go to Mexico? We just had enough money to get out here to Los Angeles. He said, for $25 on your New York to Los Angeles ticket, you can get to Mexico City. I said, shit, let's go. And we was off. And I met John Carlos. I can still see him in the elevator of the Diplomatic Hotel with the fifth of Johnny Walker. He wasn't conscious to what was happening around him. And then his mentor was not there. You see, he had been leading them, and he was not there. But that, most people don't realize that when the Jamaican team ran, they raised their fists. When the one who developed the Flosby flop, where you over the high jump backwards, whenever he did his jump, he raised up his fist. And so there was a dynamic there that hasn't been told historically. For me, it was particularly personal because John Carlos, big thighs, lighter than me, taller than me. But when I was moving around Mexico City and they realized I was Black American, everybody's saying, Carlos, Carlos, Carlos. And so even these pretty little Mexican girls, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't say I'm a Negro from America. I'm not Carlos. I don't speak. So I just had to take the hugs and enjoy myself. But the highlight, because Carlos had already raised his fist, him and Tommy Smith, the highlight was 80,000 people crowded in this enormous stadium. And they could understand Spanish, so they were announcing what was happening. And so while this the marathon was going on, they were announcing where the runners were coming through the streets. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the marathon, here comes a lone black man with no shoes on, kicking it. What was his name?
Kipchoge Kenya.
Something like that. Yeah. I mean, I can just see him coming in there now. I almost peed in my pants.
We watched that on TV. Yeah.
Yeah.
Barefoot Kenyan.
Right. And so he broke the mold. He started the mold on these long distance runs by our people. I mean, the story is amazing. Most people don't realize that I was in the Congo in '64.
64?
64.
Whoa. Wow.
I was in the mountains of Guinea in '62 and in Senegal. I was in Ethiopia in '65, met with Haile Selassie.
Huh?
We have a picture of it. I was in Ethiopia again in '70 with Haile Selassie greeting the leaders from the African. I was in Ethiopia in '73 and '74, December '73 and January '74 with Haile Selassie and Dr. Clark and leaders of the white leaders of African studies. And this was Haile Selassie's last hurrah, because within months the military took over and then he was killed. But people have said they've seen me on tape in his palace in the yard, because he had this menagerie of exotic animals that were tame, leopards and all these things were tame. And at one shot, someone said they could see me kind of frowning, and I'm looking at some white people with some of his little tame animals, and I'm wishing that they would get their instinct back and bite somebody's head off. But that's on the internet. People have said they've seen it. So I can beat up Rasta thigh in Jamaica and other places because they know that I've touched the hands of Haile Selassie.
His Imperial
Amen.
Majesty.
And His Imperial Majesty.
Defender of the faith.
And it was magic to see him and Dr. Clark meet.
Whoa.
And he stood, we had 200 people, mainly white folks. He stood in Jubilee Palace before his throne for about an hour and shook everybody's hands. But there was a special meeting of him and Dr. Clark, two kindred spirits. And then we had a special meeting with him, the African-American delegation. So none of that has been told. That's not a part of any resume of mine. In the Congo, I was a part of this African program of work camps. So Reverend Robinson, who married me shortly after I had been to the Congo at the Church of the Master in Harlem, and I went there to see whether we could set up a program. Now here's the Congo in chaos, and how the hell could we set up a damn program? I'm thinking about that now. And then Reverend Robinson said, we don't want you to fly into the Congo because there's too much chaos. Well, if there's too much chaos, why am I going down there to even think about a program?
Right.
And he said, well, we're going to work it out, though. You're going to fly into the Congo, Brazzaville, and not the Congo, Kinshasa, Leopoldville.
Mm-hmm.
And so I flew into Brazzaville, and they said because Brazzaville is more stable. And I took the ferry across, and I'm in Leopoldville. And it's the most fantastic experience because the Belgians have left.
Mm. Okay.
And I'm in a mansion on the river where the Belgians lived. The Africans lived 10 miles out from the river. And between the European city, this modern city, planned city, is military camps, universities, zoos, etc. And then you had the African townships out there. I was peeing in my pants most of the time because, you know, when I get to a city, I like to go out and walk, you know. And, I tried that once. And when a pack of dogs came after my black ass,
Really?
I was back in the house. Europeans left, and they left their dogs.
Mm.
Breeding wild.
So these dogs were running around looking for some meat, and some dark meat was not beyond their palate.
They took the gold and left.
And
Yeah.
but there were some African Americans that I knew, African Caribbeans that I knew, that were there working with the United Nations. The United Nations had set up ENDA, which was the institute to train the Congolese. See, Congolese, even though the Belgians gave them independence in June 1960, I was in Europe then, the Congolese had no intention of giving them freedom. They only had 12 trained college graduates in the whole damn country, a lot of technicians. 12 trained, and one of them was Lumumba, and he went through, like most of them, through the college to become a priest, not to become a leader of a nation. And so the UN set up an institute in which they were training the Congolese how to run the Congo. But the thing was so bad that it was clear to me that if I'm afraid to walk out in the streets because of dogs, we ain't gonna have no program here. But the African Americans were so glad to have me there, so they took me out. We went to the Macambo Club where they had, you know, European, Congolese jazz and all, good food, et cetera, et cetera. And we almost had a fight there because some white man was negative to us, and so our men were ready to kick ass and the fight. Now, when I decided to leave after a week, and it was clear that we ain't gonna have no program in the Congo. I couldn't get anybody to take me out to the airport. And so Shirley Barnes, who went on the Operation Crossroads Africa program, Inez Smith Reed, she was a combination twin. Her brother George graduated Yale, and so did Inez. Her brother George lived on 125th Street in Morningside Gardens, 123rd, whatever, for years. He was a judge. He had gone on the Crossroads program in 1960, the year my wife went. And Inez was there as part of the training team of the United Nations, and so was Shirley Barnes. Shirley had a Volkswagen, and so she finally did drive me at the risk of her life out to the airport. Even the Marines at the embassy couldn't do it. Now, any black woman in a Volkswagen driving herself is most likely a prostitute.
Mm.
So Shirley risked a lot driving me out the airport. When I got there, the plane coming in from Nigeria was on fire. But I was hell-bent of getting out of the cargo. So I waited till they fixed this on-fire plane and got in it and flew out to Nigeria. Now that ain't in the Jeffries story at all.
What year was this?
This is 1964 Congo. Jump up to 1974 Congo. Okay, and I'm in the Hotel Continental. And I hear some Negroes trying to sing, and he's terrible. So I tell my wife, I said, there's some Negro trying to sing, and he can't hold a note. Later, I leave the hotel, and the person next door is leaving at the same time. And I look up, and it's Hugh Masekela. I later confronted him with this. I said, do you remember when you were in the Congo at the Continental Hotel? He says, yes. He said, I was put in charge of the whole Muhammad Ali entertainment thing. So I was in the Congo at the time of the Muhammad Ali fight, but they had to postpone it for 6 weeks, and I couldn't stay for the 6 weeks.
Rumble
see,
in the jungle.
Rumble in the jungle, whatever. And none of that is in the Jeffries story. I mean, in other words, it will stuff like that will just go with me. Go with me.
No, it's recorded
No,
now. It's recorded. It's documented now.
Church, we're gonna have you at least once a month.
Right.
Maybe
And the
more than
last 2 years ago, I went to Nigeria. I've been going back and forth to Nigeria for 30, 50 years. My wife first went in 1960 before it was independent. She was there in the summer of 60. It didn't get independence until the fall, October of 60. And then as a representative of Crossroads Africa, I had to go to Nigeria to set up programs. So I was in Nigeria in 62, 63, 64, 65, all that. And was there before it exploded with the Civil War. But I knew the Civil War was coming because when I was in the North, you could see that they hated the South. When I went to the Eastern region and the Western region, the Yorubas in the West and the Igbos in the East, they said, we're not going to be ruled by camels and flies. And what they were saying was that the census data that they were taking of the North was counting the flies and the camels. So I said, this is going to bust out. And it did, you know. And so this latest thing in Nigeria that I went a couple of years ago with the Conference of Black Mayors. And I couldn't believe the road from Lagos to Ibadan, which I had traveled on many times. It's a mess with potholes and everything. And I said, how can you have had $350 billion of oil money passed through your hands, and you can't complete the most important road in your country? And so, being an outspoken Negro, I said, when I get up to a Shugbo where the conference was, I'm going to have to say something.
Yeah.
And the road was so bad that all along the road they have these large Yoruba towns that are maybe 50,000, 100,000. And what they do is they just throw the garbage down. So here you have these piles of garbage along this national road. And I was really hurt. And so when I got up to, with the mayors, these black mayors from around America, because I had challenged them to go to, I was in Atlanta or New Orleans. They were based in Atlanta. I went to New Orleans, and I had this chart of the great cities of Africa. So I said, you all are linking up the great cities of Black America. You need to be linked up with these cities, and Cairo and Addis and all Johannesburg and whatnot. And so they took me up on it, and they did. So now we're actually having a conference in Nigeria. And while I went up to Oshogbo, we met the governor, and they immediately took us, before we even got settled in our rooms, it took us 5 hours or 6 hours out to the end of this state. Nigeria is divided into 20-something states, so this was Ondo State. And they took us out to an experimental agricultural thing where they're actually doing, so oil had seduced the Nigerians into not farming. So they were importing food.
Yes.
And they also used to export cocoa, but they stopped doing that. And but this smart governor, who was a medical doctor, had them growing mushrooms. Now, a tray of mushrooms this size would be $300. So if I'm in a warehouse and they got rows and rows, you got thousands and thousands of dollars. So they were getting these farmers into something that was going to be a cash crop for them. It was really wonderful, and to see the young people being trained to go as agents into the villages. So, but I'm still saying, when I get a chance to, at the conference, to say my piece, I got to tell their little black asses off. And so then the guy takes us to a medical facility that is so high-powered that UNESCO is evaluating it in terms of the success they have in preventing death in pregnancy and death in early childbirth. So the stuff is piling up. I got the negative high up, but the stuff on the positive side is weighing up. And so when I get a chance to speak, I realize that a couple of these governors that we went to, they got bus stops, covered bus stops. The roads are all paved. We're in a new conference center. They got schools. They got, in other words. So what I saw on the road was not the country.
No.
And so luckily I saw that before I opened up my mouth, because I was given a key position to be spokesperson for the African Americans. Then I said, we got to see the traditional structure. It's good to see the modern structure. And so they said, oh yes, we're going to see the Oni of Ife. Well, I had seen the old Oni of Ife, so I was glad to go back. And there was women and men, mayors in the delegation. So that, a woman from Philadelphia who was a Yoruba person, she was in charge. So she had asked one of our sisters if she could honor the group for the female, and that meant going to the Oni and with a curtsy, a bow. And then she said, Dr. J, could you do it for the males? And I said, yes, even though I knew that it was a prostration. Before the Oni. So I said, I just hope these, I was 74 then, I said, I hope these 74-year-old knees don't betray me. And so I did what I was supposed to do, and then while I was getting up, the Oni had his entourage, and the largest beaded crown in the entourage.
In the city.
One of his most important assistants and associates. When I started to get up, he yelled out, that's my teacher. That's my teacher.
Yes.
And then they gave him the mic. And he said, Dr. Jeffries, he said, he took care of us. In the early 80s, we were in America. We were at City College. He said if we went to jail, he would help us get out. If somebody died and we had to go to Nigeria, he would help us. I mean, it was the greatest testimony anybody could have made about who and what I was. Unsolicited. And it's filmed, and I don't have a copy of the film.
I don't know about this.
You need a personal documentarian.
But people would not believe that we're up in the mountains of Guinea with Miriam Makeba coming out of the mist of her 3-story, 5-room hut with red carpeting. I mean, who's going to believe it? Who's going to believe that I was in the palace with Ufe Bwani, the president of the palace, with a delegation of 35 to 40 black Americans? And I had been living in Ivory Coast for 2 years. So I had been able to go to all of the key meetings, important, even secret meetings. So the head of protocol asked me, George Onyang, asked me if I would do the honors of introducing our group to the president of Ivory Coast. And so I'm into that flow by this time, and so I introduced our Crossroads group to the president, and then I accompanied them out. And George Onyang told me later, he said, the president said, who's the new man in our staff? In other words,
You performed that well.
in other words,
he thought you were part of
that,
the staff.
yes, that I performed that
Better
well,
than his staff.
that the president of the Ivory Coast, so I was a member of his presidential staff, et
Yeah,
cetera.
you put the local boys to shame.
So, I mean, these are the things that have been a part of the fantastic story. But it's not just me, it's us. I took Coretta Scott King to meet Robert Mugabe, and he treated her like a head of state. Not for herself, but for what she represented. She represented us.
Mm-hmm.
And Ronald Walters, who was one of Dr. Clark's Tiger Cubs with me, and along with James Turner. And I was an athlete, but Ron beat my ass running from our bus to get to the top of the Zimbabwe ruins. And so we were at the hotel waiting to go for the state dinner. And they had these white Mercedes to take us there. But Ron had to go to the bathroom. So I waited in the lobby. He went upstairs, took a poop, and came back down and said, I don't know why he didn't go in the bathroom. And, but at any rate, by the time he got back, our Mercedes was gone. So then we had to improvise. So we said, well, let's take a cab. And so we went out to get one of the cabs, and so we told him to take us to the State House. And he looked at us like we crazy. He said, cabs can't go to the State House. Well, we said, well, we're supposed to be in the State House. He said, we don't care what you're supposed to be. We ain't gonna get shot. So we compromised. We said, take us as close to the State House as you can go. And then they did. And then we hoofed it. And we finally got to the State House, and we're banging on the door to try to get in. And the people said, well, who are you? We said, well, we're part of the delegation. They said, well, we better check. And so we're outside, anxious whether we're going to get inside. And finally they opened the door, and they said, yes, we heard you're part of the delegation. Come on in. And so the people were in a big reception area like this. But the state dinner was inside the stateroom, of course. And so we were just glad to be inside and to be chit-chatting with the folks in there. But the people who had brought us in were running around doing this. I said, we all can relax. I didn't know why they were doing all the things they were doing. And I said, we're happy now. We're all right. And the next thing we know, they told us to come on. And they take us out of the reception area into the stateroom, into the dinner. And they just didn't have a table for us in the back. They took us to the head table. And we sat with President Mugabe, his wife, and Mrs. King, and Marty III. Now the story is, because I'm sitting next to Mrs. Mugabe, and she says that when they came in to say there's some people outside, that say they're part of the delegation, they had to check with Mugabe and the rest. And so when they said their name is Walters and Jeffries, and then the president looks at his wife, Prime Minister again at that time, I guess, looks at his wife, and then they say to each other, do you think that's the professor that was on Zimbabwe TV last night? And then they agree that it was me. And she said that Mugabe was listening to me And he was just pounding that on his table, that's a teacher, that's a teacher, that's a teacher. And actually, I do have that tape of me on Zimbabwe TV when I was doing my systems analysis and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
these are the things that I'd like to write up in the Jeffries story, but I ain't got time to write. I'm running around still doing the work. And by the time I get ready to write, I'll be too old to do it.
Well, we
Personal
can,
document.
we can
But
do
see,
more
if-
of this.
If a person like
We can do
Hire
more
Winston
of
Gilchrist
it.
to follow you for 2 weeks, document
that's right,
everything.
or he could tape some of the story and that.
Yeah, I just taped another half an hour right now.
Yeah, that's one of the things.
Now, wait till you see this. I'm gonna email this to you. I'm gonna put it on the website. All right?
Your bag.